Bryan Mattimore is the co-founder and chief idea guy for Growth Engine, a 22-year-old innovation agency based in Stamford, Connecticut. Through Growth Engine, Bryan has worked with over one-third of Fortune 100 companies. He's written 4 books on ideation, innovation, and creative processes, and he's an innovation and marketing instructor for the California Institute of Technology in their executive education department. Bryan reached out to me because he wanted to share a couple stories, but particularly one story about how he connected with the soul of his father within his father's last months of life. You'll hear it on Third Eyesight. My name is Juan Francisco, and I'm a psychic medium and tarot card reader. I've always been curious about the supernatural, the paranormal, and psychic abilities, and I'm here to share my stories and interview folks who want to share their own stories with us. Let's get to it. Bryan, thank you for joining the podcast today.
Well, hey, Juan, it's good to meet you, and it's good to be on. Thank you.
It's my absolute pleasure to host you. So tell us where you're based and why you decided to share your experiences with us.
Well, I'm based in Stamford, Connecticut, and frankly, it's because I responded to a HERA request, and there were some interesting questions on it. So I'm happy to share. It's interesting in my career in business, this stuff generally doesn't come up, and so I don't really get an opportunity to share it. And nor do I necessarily feel the need, but this was a case where I said, well, I'm happy to share.
And no, thank you so much. And for those who don't know, HARO is a Help a Reporter Out, which is what I used when I first launched the podcast to get folks to tell their stories, to submit their stories, to be on the podcast. So that's what HARO is. And yeah, we first touched base with each other maybe a year ago, maybe more than a year ago already. So it's good to finally have you on the podcast. And
thank you.
Yeah, and actually on that topic of, these are things we usually don't talk about, especially in corporate sectors. I mean, these things don't go together. And I've worked in the corporate sector. I work in the nonprofit sector now, but still just in mainstream culture, this seems still a little bit taboo for many people. So do you, in your experience, how was it like in your upbringing and family, or do you feel like you've had social circles or environments where you have been able to share this?
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by this. I know what you mean, but even in the corporate environment, I do ideation and creativity training, et cetera. And when we do that work, because it's creative, I can see the spiritual opening at times. I can see the light go on in people. And so while this work is, or these stories are not explicitly told, the spiritual currents are there and come through when people are ideating individually and together. And so that's an extraordinary thing for me. To really answer your question, I was brought up in a conventional upper middle class, and Fairfield County, Connecticut. My dad was a madman and an advertising guy, but put a great deal of interest and emphasis on creativity, and so that's been my life's work.
Got it. And on the topic of what this is, speaking of what this is, I know we're going to talk about 2 or maybe several different instances, some of which relate to the idea of like souls, the other side, and another one tapping more into a story about your intuition. So what's first like to ask you, you've had really deep experiences around the time your father passed. It sounds like it was in your early 20s, and there was some an element of helping him transition, out of body travel. Could you share a little bit about what that story entails?
Yeah, I had been a student of spiritual teachings. I had gone to all different ashrams and different places. I was curious, and I finally found a path for me that was great. It was Eckankar, based on Paul Twitchell's book, A Key to Secret Worlds. That was revolutionary for me. Anyway, so I was studying all these things, having inner experiences, and when my dad got sick with cancer, I was fortunate to spend the last 4 or 5 months with him. I was on an exchange or break from Dartmouth, and oh my gosh, it was so wonderful to be with him. And I was interpreting his dreams for him, and because that transition out of the physical body can bring up really interesting experiences. And when he finally did pass, the experience that I wrote you about and that I'll talk about here, um, at the beginning, and this all occurred in the dream state for me. I was with him and saying, you're dead, you're dead, Dad, you're dead, you're dead, you're dead, and frankly felt a little guilty about that because clearly he wasn't dead. I mean, he was out of the physical body, but he wasn't dead. But he was somewhat, I would say, attached to the physical plane at that point in his transition and didn't know that he had transitioned. And so I've come to understand that me saying that was a service to him, to make the transition to the next stage.
And you said this happened in dream state. So what were you interacting with your father like did each of you
Yes.
were interacting in dream state?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm sure some of the listeners and you have experienced these, ecstatic states. I mean, it's lucid dreaming or whatever you want to call it. These are more real than physical states, and so that was the case. And so I was with him, for probably two weeks or more. I don't know if it was every night, but close to every night, helping, right? And the end of the story was he maybe this was 3 weeks in. I had the final experience with him at that time. He was established on one of the inner planes. I think it was probably the astral plane, and he was on a beautiful lake and a beautiful home. And so I was so pleased that he had, successfully made that transition, and that frankly I'd helped him.
And when you had that last meeting with him on the astral plane, what was the amount of time, if you don't mind me asking, between that experience in that dream state and the moment you learned of his passing?
Well, I was with him when he passed, in the hospital, and so it might have been 3 or 4 weeks before it was established. I don't really remember, but that would be my guess. And so, it was obviously, for me, this was an incredibly important experience, because I knew that he was continuing on, and so I felt so blessed to have experienced that with him and to be part of his transition. What a gift, right?
Definitely. And this is not something that I personally experienced myself. I'm sure there are people listening that have, but that sounds like quite a gift. And after his transition, how have you continued that connection with him?
Well, my bias is as you grow in spiritual awareness, sometimes these, for lack of a better term, whiz-bang experiences or whatever become so much less important. The foundations of spiritual awareness have been established. And for instance, when my mom died, I didn't need to help her make that transition, but B, I didn't need to have that experience with her on the inner planes because I knew she was okay, and so I think I probably could have had those if I put my attention on it, and et cetera, et cetera. I remember at one point in my spiritual development, I was reading all these books on lucid dreaming, and so I'd have all these lucid dreams. It's where you put your attention. And so the bottom line for this is I didn't feel the need to see that transition to help her through it. A, she didn't need it, but also, I'm well established in this, and so but to answer your question, the relationship goes on not so much in an inner dream state experience, lucid experience, whatever. It just, knowing that he's there and that I could call on his insights and wisdom and ideas and creativity. And when I say call on it, it's really more intuitional than say, "Hey, Dad, what do you think?" No, it's just more at the intuitional level.
Right. And you keep mentioning lucid dreaming and this dream practice is what helped you to connect with your father on the soul level. What does that practice of lucid dreaming entail? Because it's something I'm actually not too familiar with. So, in the books you've read and in the experiences you've had, how did you attain that level of lucid dreaming?
Well, the way I think of it now, it's in the Eckankar terms or Eckes terms or whatever, it's soul travel, right? So it's the ability to travel through the different state, the different planes, the astral plane, the mental plane, the causal plane, the etheric plane, on up to the soul plane. And so, I've been studying these disciplines and practicing them for over 40 years. And so, at the soul plane, it's a plane of beingness. And so it's frankly, soul travel is somewhat of a misnomer because you're not really traveling, you're just being there. But it's these ecstatic states, if you want to call them, as in my opinion, as you grow in awareness, they become natural part of yourself rather than these experiences that you have. It's part of who you are, and it's how you approach life every day. And so I'll chant HU, for instance, HU as a spiritual mantra for myself, and that's part of my spiritual disciplines. And the way I think of that is you're kind of tuning the tuning fork to be in better touch with and aligned with the universe.
So would you call the state of lucid dreaming, or the process that gets you to that point, would you call it a meditative practice, or would you distinguish between meditation and this practice?
I would distinguish it. Meditation, you can meditate, or contemplate is a more active form of meditation, right? As a spiritual discipline in the morning, and then the lucid dreaming obviously tends to happen when when you're asleep, and you can program is probably the wrong word, but you can sort of through disciplines um, begin to create these states for yourself, by chanting certain things before you go to bed, or having certain requests, or drawing pictures, or whatever it is. Again, it's attention and awareness. And if you're really interested in having those lucid dreams, my opinion is you can have them. Just it may take a month or 2 months or 3 months, but if you uh, every time you go before you go to bed, I would like to have this experience on this plane, and maybe you chant a sacred word or mantra, and you do enough of that, and you're going to start having those experiences.
Pardon my ignorance, because I don't know if this is legitimate or not, but I had a roommate that told me he was practicing lucid dreaming by as he was trying to fall asleep, and people can't watch this. Maybe not if I don't post this clip, but with his thumb, tapping his thumb with each of his other four fingers over and over again. Um, is that something you've heard of, or are there other ways of tapping into this or preparing for lucid dreaming that sounds similar to you?
I've never heard of that quote technique, for lack of a better term. I mean, there are spiritual exercises where you can sort of almost like chant while you're doing yoga, for instance, and that will often help you project out of the body, for instance. But I think if you get behind what he was doing, it was sort of bringing an awareness to that transitional state. And however you do that is terrific. If you're counting sheep or tapping your fingers or whatever it is, it's about maintaining is probably the wrong word. Establishing consciousness through that twilight zone or period into the dream state.
Got it. Got it. And going back to your experience with your father's soul, first of all, this is something that I've read about before, where when someone is in the final months or the final weeks of their life in the physical world, that their soul does travel. It's almost like in preparation. Have you been able to also to connect with other people's souls in addition to the experience you have with your father?
There have been ecstatic inner experiences, both with teachers. Forgive me for mentioning Eckankar again, but I early on in my uh, spiritual career experience, whatever you want to call it, I had a meeting with an inner master, and it was interesting because I told my then girlfriend, now wife at the time, oh, I just met my inner teacher. And it was, I don't know if it was 6 months later or whatever, that I discovered my path. and I see this guy's picture, and I say, and he was one of the Eck masters. So I was like, wow, this is really interesting, right? that I'm having these experiences with these inner teachers, and there are teachers at different planes, and different sacred texts at each plane. So you can, it's like going to school. You graduate and you go into higher planes and different teachers, and you get passed along in this cosmic buddy system, right? And so yes, experience with those inner masters and experiences with other people too. And there are times of helping. There are times of burning off karma. For instance, one experience I had was I was stabbed on the inner plane, and it was a stabbing. I mean, it was like, yeah, it was a stabbing. I think it was on the astral plane, and that was wonderful because I didn't have to. I could burn off that karma without having to experience it on the physical plane.
Wow, that is fascinating. And so this incident that you experienced, this stabbing, was it done was it caused by another soul being? Was there some karmic connection between you and the person who did the stabbing, the soul who did the stabbing?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't even quite remember how it happened, but I know that I was stabbed. It was in the lower back, and it was obviously a major karmic burn off thing based on previous experiences of mine. And so uh, that's kind of all I remember, to be honest. This was many years ago, um, but I personally love that notion that you can burn off so much karma in these inner states and not necessarily have to burn them off on the physical states.
And for you, is there a connection talking about all this and having all these experiences? Is do you have a belief in past lives and reincarnation? And if do you?
Yeah, yes, the answer is absolutely yes. And gosh, I'll never forget. I was in fifth grade, and this another student, she brought in this Egyptian stuff, and I freaked out. I'm like, oh my God, I had a really bad incarnation in Egypt. And then there was, experiences of being an advisor to a king, and then the being fearful of certain people in authority because I was ultimately executed, and then fear of persecution, having my head on a post on a bridge, all those sort of difficult experiences that we've all had, whether people believe it or not. It's having experienced so many of these past lives on the inside. um, it brings awareness to why certain things have happened here. I remember when I was launching my first book, uh, this book on creativity, 99% inspiration. I'm meeting with all the PR people at the publishing firm, and I started to sweat, and I'm like, and not just kind of sweat. This was they had to bring a towel in, so that's how bad it was, because this was accepting the mantle of my mission to popularize the structure of creativity. Now I was stepping out, and this was approximating death, right? Because I had been killed for certain things in previous life. So this was I understood what was happening. Whereas if I hadn't had that awareness, I would have said, what the heck is going on here, right? But I had that awareness of based on a past life experience. And I know everyone in the audience, we've all had this, whether it's deja vu or certain cultures or certain people or whatever. There are things that are, quote, unexplainable on the rational level, but certainly when you look at the karmic patterns in past lives, then it all begins to make sense.
Absolutely, I resonate with that a lot. I did past life regression maybe 8 years ago, and I would like to do it again. And there were things I learned that
Yes.
connected the dots for me in this life, and some patterns and relationships I have in this life. I would like to ask you next about an experience you had surrounding your dog Clyde, right? Could you share a little bit about that?
Sure. We had English setters when I grew up. The first one was Freckles, and the second one was Sam. Sam actually had a company named after him. It became the second largest research firm in the nation. It was called Sammy. My dad was an entrepreneur at Time Incorporated and formed this company, Sammy, to compete with Nielsen, and then it was Sammy Burke, and then Control Data and IRI bought what was left of it. Anyway, um, so dogs were a big deal in our family, and the English setter I got was Clyde, and oh my gosh, I brought him up to Dartmouth with me, and it was just so wonderful, and he just was such a superior soul. I just loved him to death. And so when he died, it was really difficult. And so luckily, I did have those inner experiences with Clyde. And then the last time I saw him, he was being taken off by in the care of a master or with a master. And so I knew, oh, okay, he's taken care of. And so that was, it makes you almost want to cry because these are such profound experiences where with souls that you love, right? And so that was again such a blessing for me that I saw that and knew that he was okay.
Was it your experience with your father and his transition? Did that occur before your experience with your dog Clyde, or the
Yeah, that was
reverse?
pre-Clyde.
Okay.
Pre-Clyde.
So that's really something that you've had this experience with your father, and you've had it with I'm gonna call it. I mean, this. I have a dog. I'm a dog dad myself. They're family. So you've had this with if I could say your dog child, so to speak, or your best friend, and when you say that him, you saw Clyde go under the care of a master. Could you describe the energy of this master, or what does the word master mean for you? I think I have an idea of what it means, but I would like to hear from you what it means.
Yeah, well, forgive me, because I don't mean to say anything about Eckankar specifically, but you asked me, and I feel very strongly that people need to stay on the path that they're on if they're happy with it, right? I think that's really important, and I would never presume to want to change anyone else's path. But since you asked me, I mean, there is an inner master in Eckankar, and based on the outer physical body of the lead teacher, the term is the Mahanta, but the inner master then was the one who Clyde went off with. Now there is a specific Ek master, he's called Prajapati, who is in charge of animals, helping those souls. But in this case, it was the inner master that Clyde went off with.
Got it. And could you pronounce this teacher's name again, please?
It's Sri Harold Clem. Harold Clem was
Okay.
his name. Yeah. Before that, and I had joined Eckankar, I think probably in 70, let's see, 77, I guess. Before that, it was Darwin Gross. And before that, the modern day founder was Paul Twitchell. And I had read a book of his called I was in a bookstore, because as you know, you read all these spiritual books, and this book, Key to Secret Worlds, it was like my head snapped back because I had a bias that any spiritual teacher, a true spiritual teacher, should have traveled the inner worlds. They talk about heaven, right? And so I said, well, my bias was there should be a map of heaven, and somebody should be able to tell you what these levels are. And so when I read that book, I said, oh my gosh, this is the first time that I've seen an explicit map of these different levels of heaven and different states. And so therefore, that for me was a really an important moment.
I think it's all coming together for me now, as you said that. I'm glad that I asked you, because what I'm understanding is an inner master. Am I right in saying that an inner master in this inner world or
Yes.
inner realm, that a master would be the role of sort of like a lead in that inner world?
Yes. Thank you for making that distinction. I didn't do a good job of explaining that because
All good.
it's not my master, it's an inner master. The inner master has mastered his own beingness and is essentially a leader or even a guide. I mean, he or she is a guide and will often help you, and so you have karmic burn off at a level that's not too intense, right? The sort of as you move to these ecstatic states, so it's a more natural way to do it than if you were just on your own. So it's a teacher, it's a guide, it's a leader, a way shower, all those things. So thank you for making that distinction. That's important.
No, thank you. And I'm going to definitely look into some of this literature because it sounds really interesting. Speaking of literature, good segue. See what I did there. So in your book, Idea Stormers: How to Lead and Inspire Creative Breakthroughs, you talk about an ideation session you hosted once that the way you describe it, it sounds like you had some psychic or intuitive downloads. So tell us about that.
Yeah, and there are those in every session I do, you know. So I'm, as I think most good facilitators, you're working at 5 or 6 or 7 levels, right? When you're facilitating, you're hearing what people saying, you're watching the body language, the ideas are coming out, and you're part of you is hopefully laddering up, asking interesting questions, laddering up to bigger concepts, et cetera, et cetera. But this case was special, and I've never re-experienced it. I had done, I think this was the 5th day in the row of doing ideation sessions, right? And you know, when you do these sessions, it's a tremendous energy drain. You know, because you're completely and totally involved in the process, right? And so that's why, you know, people say, well, you could do this 5 days a week. You can't do it 5 days a week. You'd go crazy, I think. You can't have that flow like that. But I was in a case where I was in either the 4th or 5th day because I had to. You know, it was one of those situations, and I went into this ecstatic state where I could see the ideas that were going to come out before they appeared, you know? And so it was almost like I was on this time track ahead of where we were. And and sort of seeing all these things before people would say them. And so it was this and if you think of it, you know, that ideas are coming down from the astral plane or whatever, then that makes sense. But this, and it lasted for maybe 20 minutes, a half hour, and then it went away. But that was an extraordinary and wonderful and very cool thing, which I've never experienced since.
That's quite interesting. Yeah, that's something I've never personally experienced. It's rare that that happens. I think there are a lot of gifted people, and that makes me want to ask you. Thanks for sharing that, first of all. And between this experience of I'm going to call it foretelling. I know that word is loaded for many people, has some connotations, but it's foretelling. Between this instance of foretelling and the experiences you've had um, in this inner world and in the dream state, are these experiences that you feel are accessible to everybody, or do you feel like it takes and or takes some special dedication or practice?
Everybody, yes, and practice, yes. You know, you know, I guess I would say if they're available to me, they're available to everyone. Give me a break. So absolutely, that's the first thing. Um, but yes, spiritual disciplines. You know, I had a friend of mine who had so many soul travel experiences, and I said, "Yeah, I'd kind of like to have this or that experience." And she kind of said, "Well, how much time are you willing to put in, and how much attention are you willing to do on that?" And it wasn't. It would have been nice, but it wasn't important enough to me to, you know, to spend 2 or 3 months really focused on that. So the answer is absolutely for everyone, and absolutely through spiritual disciplines you can get there, whether it's chanting or, you know, whatever it is, internal visualizations, etc. Absolutely.
And coming back down to the micro level with this specific instance with the ideation session and being time ahead, let's say, and being able to know what was coming, what ideas, what creative ideas were coming out of the group before they mentioned them. And you said this happens often for you, or that you are able to tap into intuition pretty consistently in the line of work you do. So as a professional, how do you feel that tapping into that part of you has helped you grow or develop as a professional?
Oh, that is such a great question. I've never thought of it exactly that way. I think by having to be open, I've done over 1,000 ideation sessions now, and also creativity training. By the way, when we do creativity training, we do action learning. So we're working on real world challenges. So they're like ideation sessions anyway. But all this these after more than 1,000 of these, I still get nervous at night. And what's going on there is that the mind is being uh, freaking out or involved or whatever it is to get me ready for that. It's like a pure openness that's required, I think, to be at your best when you're facilitating. Because again, you're working at several levels and you're totally open to, frankly, the group consciousness. And that's really important, more so than the individual consciousness. For lack of a better term, there's a group consciousness formed. And so when I tune into that, that requires a certain discipline and an openness and awareness. And frankly, there are a lot of times I'd rather not. I'd rather be sitting at home, watching a football game. But that's the work you do. And so it's like a performance, and you can talk to actors, and they get into these flow states and all the rest. And then it's an extraordinary experience after it's open, and you want to go celebrate because the channels have opened up, people have opened up, and new ideas have occurred, and you've been part of the cosmic plan here, for lack of a better word, and it's extraordinary, right? I mean, how these are ecstatic states, and to see that openness amongst people and to form that group is so incredible. I'll tell you one experience I had where we had one of Darth Vader's missionaries in one of these groups I was doing, and oh my God, it was just brutal. And that almost never ever happens because people are such good people, and they're open to helping and all the rest. And I didn't know what to do, and the gods smiled on me. And this woman she was head of customer service, if you can believe that, and she was called out. I couldn't believe this has never happened before or since. She was called out of the meeting to deal with an issue, and so that was such a fortunate thing. But that's a unique thing and an anomaly. In 99.9% of the time, you have this wonderful openness of creativity and the open channel that's so wonderful to be part of.
What are the industries that you've consulted with? What kinds of folks usually consult with you when it comes to creative ideation and these kinds of sessions?
It's you asked about reincarnation before. I've lived over 1,000 lifetimes because I've been in 1,000 different industries, whether it's insurance or medical or food or skincare or cosmetics or finance. Any and every industry you can imagine, I've worked in, and so it's wonderful. They'll send me like if it's a food project, they'll send me $1 million worth of research before the session. I'll read that, prepare the session, get all the stimuli and triggers, and then we'll do the session. And so again, I've been doing more and more creativity and ideation training these days because I want to share the processes with the world. And a lot of my clients have called on me to do that. And so that's very rewarding, working with Caltech and executive ed, or TCU and executive ed, or IEC, or even the city of New York, working with them, sort of training people in these processes, both of the techniques themselves and the facilitation part of that. That is in some ways even more rewarding than getting, quote, the big idea, because people, I can see the lights go on in people, and that's wonderful.
And the way you described the cosmic group consciousness, like I think the fact that you feel when you are doing these sessions some cosmic sense of community, of that energy, and you've had these experiences of tapping into your intuition doing this, it just shows me, and I don't need proof to know this, it's something I believe, but it just reiterates the fact that spiritual energy, intuitive energy knows no bounds. Doesn't matter what industry you're in, doesn't matter what line of work you're in, whether it's a desk job or you're an actor, it's all energy, and it's interchangeable, transferable. um, so yeah, that's why I was so interested in talking with you, because I have yet to talk to somebody who is in a line of work, the kind of line of work that you're in, and has shared experiences like this have happened on the job. I think that's really remarkable.
Well, thank you. And you said two, I thought, really wonderful things. This cosmic sense of community. I've never heard it framed that way. I love that. That's beautiful statement. And this notion also of no bounds is also wonderful. So thank you for both of those comments. I love them.
Yeah, and well, I just think creativity because if I say I'm a creative, um, I think, and I'm sure maybe you'll agree. I think we all have creativity in us, which is I have a feeling why you lead these sessions. It's just about bringing it out, and it's an energy that we can tap into, just like our intuition. Would you say?
Absolutely. I mean, there are famous studies about, kids testing it, 98% of kids testing at the genius level of creativity with the NASA creativity test when they're born, and but then by the time they're 12, that number in the population has gone down to about 12%. We're all born. Well, if you have kids, I mean, oh my gosh, they're unbelievable. It's like in one of my book, the book Idea Stormers, I was watching with my daughter the Wizard of Oz, and when Glinda leaves for the first time and she floats off into that yellow orb, right? And she said to me, my daughter, who maybe she was, I don't know how old she was young, but anyway, she said, "Where's she going?" And I said, "I don't know. Where do you think she's going?" And my daughter said, "Oh, I think she's going to play tennis." And so she made a wonderful connection, right? That it looked like a tennis ball. I mean, come on, you know, come on. So that's a long answer to your question. Absolutely, we're all born with these creative abilities and connection making, and so sometimes when we start our creativity training, we'll have everybody in the group share a time when they were creative as a kid. And what you'll find interesting is that thing that they might share can often be a symbol for their future life's career, which is extraordinary, right? When I was a kid, I used to do hair and makeup, or when I was a kid, I built forts, and now I'm an architect. And you see that over and over again. And so there's this sort of much broader view of uh, who we are, where we've come from, and where we're going, and our mission in life. That when you tune into some of these experiences with your kid as a kid, they may become apparent to you.
And I think it's no mistake that there are so many people that take a special close look at how um, expressing yourself creatively, whether on your own or as a career, just the act of being creative, especially with an element of play, a lot of people feel that that can help us tap into our intuitive side. Like the is it the left side of the brain? I like the is it the left side of the brain that's the creative, I
Well,
believe?
it's the research has shown that the left and right thing is not that valid anymore, but
True.
it's the right side. But
The
you're
right
absolutely
side.
right. Yes, it's
You know
yeah.
what I'm thinking of? Because there's isn't I don't know, is it true? Well, they used to say that the right side of the brain has something to do with the left side of the body. I don't know how
Yes.
true that is anymore. But I know that like in card readings, I'm a card reader and I've read about this that the left side of the body, like you shuffle with your right hand, but you deal with your left hand. Now, that's just theory. I'm not taking it as fact. But what I'm trying to say is I've heard so many times that there are people who tap into that part of their brain, the creative part of their brain, and that has helped them tap even further into their intuitive side.
Yeah, at one point in my spiritual development, I did rebirthing, and I found myself the right side was really pounding on the left side, so the masculine side was pounding against the feminine side, if you will, and I just got an operation on, I just got a new knee on my left side, so there's more integration I know for me to be done between the male and the female parts of myself. But we need to integrate those, obviously.
Yeah, 100%. And as a final note, I'm never gonna see Glinda in The Wizard of Oz in that last scene the same way ever again. I do rewatch the movie because I grew up with the movie. I love the movie. I own it, and I'll watch it to put a smile on my face, put it on the background. But I'll never see that scene of Glinda drifting off in her bubble the same way again.
Yeah, it was right at the beginning of the movie, so you don't even have to watch the whole movie. I'm kidding, but
Oh, that's right. It is the beginning of the movie. Well,
yes.
we'll never see it the same way again. Well, tell us how our listeners can learn more about you and your business.
Yeah, I mean, if they're interested in, particularly in creativity, and ideation training and innovation frameworks, and I have a lot of books out there, but they can just go on to the website growth-engine.com, and contact me that way if they would, or keynote speeches. I've been working a lot with educational, National Association of Community College Entrepreneurship, and all these different higher education entities, and even the city of New York. So any department, whether it's learning and development or HR, or even keynote to, I did a keynote for 150 clinical trial people. And the HR people kept saying to me, they're not creative, they're not creative. And I said, well, okay. And then they were unbelievably creative. It was so extraordinary and so wonderful. So that's a long answer. Yes, people, if they go to growth-engine.com, they could reach me that way. Or my email is bmattimore@growth-engine.com.
Wonderful. Well, Bryan, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Well, thank you, Juan. This was really fun, and I think I remembered things that I didn't know I knew. So thank you.
There we go. Bringing it out of the woodwork. Thank you, Bryan.
Thanks, Juan.